At 33 years old, I'm Lauren, and I have a life many people would call a dream come true. I'm the CEO of Stellar Motors, my family's luxury car company. I've worked hard to get here, and it hasn't been easy. Being a woman in this industry can feel a bit like trying to park a huge truck in a tiny spot in the middle of a busy city. It's tough, but when you get it right, it feels amazing. As I walk into my office one morning, my assistant eagerly tells me, "Lauren, the new prototype is ready for your inspection." I feel a rush of excitement. This model has the potential to change the electric car industry forever. I walk up to the car, admiring its sleek design, and I can't help but smile. This is exactly why I love what I do. Building something this special, something that could reshape how people drive, fills me with pride and satisfaction. Later that evening, I'm at a fancy charity event, surrounded by some of the city's most important people. As I mingle and chat, I spot someone across the room, Paul, a well-known real estate developer who's famous for his bold business moves. Our eyes meet, and I feel a spark that I haven't felt in years. When he approaches me, he says with a smile, "I hear you're quite the car enthusiast." I raise an eyebrow and reply, "And I hear you're quite the property tycoon. Should we compare notes?" We laugh and start talking. Paul is different from my cousin, Brian, who I suddenly notice across the room. Brian, already a bit tipsy, wobbles over to us. He slurs, "Lauren, why don't you ever return my calls?" I feel embarrassed and sigh, "Brian, we've talked about this. You're my cousin and I care about you, but..." He cuts me off, saying, "We'd be perfect together. I love you." I quickly lead Brian away from Paul, apologizing for the scene. With a slight smile, I say, "Family, you can't live with them, and you definitely can't sell them for parts." Over the next few weeks, Paul and I grow closer. He's ambitious, kind, and most importantly, he listens when I talk about my work. It's refreshing to have someone who really understands my passion and supports me. Compared to Brian's constant demands, Paul feels like a breath of fresh air. One evening, during a cozy dinner, Paul surprises me by getting down on one knee. With a sincere look, he says, "Lauren, you're the most amazing woman I've ever met. Will you marry me?" My heart races, and without a second thought, I say, "Yes." Tears of joy fill my eyes as I realize this is the start of a new chapter. We decide to announce our engagement at the next family gathering. Surrounded by my parents' happy smiles and my aunt and uncle's polite congratulations, I catch a glimpse of Brian. He's scowling, clearly unhappy, but I brush it off. Looking at Paul beside me, I feel ready for whatever lies ahead. This is my life, and I'm building a future that I love, with someone who truly cares about me. I feel a slight unease, a little sense that something isn't right. Little did I know, this was the calm before the storm. As we gather around to celebrate, my father raises his glass with a big smile and says, "A toast to Lauren and Paul." Everyone cheers, and for a moment, everything feels perfect. But then, I catch Brian's eye from across the room. The look he gives me sends a chill down my spine. Something tells me that this engagement won't be all smooth sailing. But I remind myself that I've handled tough situations before, so I think, bring it on. Soon, Paul and I dive into wedding planning, and it feels like a dream. We spend hours talking about our future together, planning every detail of our wedding and even thinking about combining our work and goals. One evening, as we sit together on the couch, I share an idea. I was thinking maybe we could expand Stellar Motors into sustainable housing. Paul's face lights up, and he says, "That's brilliant, Lauren. We could create entire eco-friendly communities." It's exciting to imagine the future together, and we feel unstoppable. But not everyone is happy about our engagement. Brian's jealousy seems to grow each day. His attempts to get my attention are becoming more desperate, and he doesn't seem to want to let go. One afternoon, as I leave the office, I find him waiting by my car. "Lauren, please," he says, his eyes red and tired. "You can't marry him. We belong together." I sigh, feeling both frustrated and sorry for him. "Brian," I say, trying to be gentle but firm, "we've talked about this. You're my cousin, and I don't feel that way about you. Please, let this go for both our sakes." But Brian doesn't give up. He starts showing up at my office unannounced, sending me endless messages, and even tries to crash one of my dinner dates with Paul. Things reach a boiling point during our usual Friday family dinner. My uncle, Timothy, glares at me from across the table. "So, Lauren," he says coldly, "I hear you've been rather cruel to my Brian. Is that how you treat families?" I nearly choke on my drink, shocked by his accusation. "Excuse me?" I reply, keeping my voice steady. "I've been nothing but patient with Brian. It's not my fault he can't accept that I'm engaged to someone else." My Aunt Julie tries to calm things down, saying, Now, let's not ruin dinner over this." But Uncle Timothy won't let it go. "You've always thought you were too good for this family, haven't you? With your luxury cars and your wealthy lifestyle." I feel my patience slipping. I stand up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and look him straight in the eye. "I've worked hard for everything I have," I say, my voice firm. "Maybe if Brian put in the same effort, he wouldn't be so focused on me." Feeling overwhelmed, I walk out of the room, needing space to clear my head. Family should be supportive, but right now, I feel as if I'm fighting a battle on two fronts. It's tough, but with Paul by my side, I know I can handle whatever comes next. As I walk away, I can hear Brian sobbing behind me, but I know I can't keep encouraging his behavior. It's time to move forward and let him deal with his emotions. Things take a darker turn when I get a call from Paul late one night. His voice is shaky. "Lauren," he says, "I just got a threatening message from a blocked number. It says if I don't leave you, I'll regret it." My heart pounds and my hands go cold. I immediately think of Brian. This seems exactly like something he'd do to scare us. We both agree to increase our security and make sure we're safe, but I'm determined not to let Brian's actions ruin our happiness. Paul and I dive even deeper into our wedding plans, putting our hearts into every little detail. It's as if we're trying to prove to ourselves and the world that nothing can come between us. One evening, while we're tasting different wedding cakes, Paul reaches for my hand. "Lauren," he says, looking at me warmly, "I want you to know that no matter what happens with your family, I'm here for you. We're in this together." I squeeze his hand, feeling a wave of emotion and a few tears in my eyes. "I know," I say softly, "I just wish things were different. I never wanted all this drama." Paul chuckles, reaching out to wipe away a tear from my cheek. "Hey, if we can handle this, we can handle anything life throws at us, right?" I nod, feeling a renewed sense of strength and confidence. We're a team, and no family troubles can change that. As the wedding rehearsal approaches, I try to set my worries aside and focus on the excitement of marrying the man I love. But there's a nagging feeling deep down, like something isn't quite right. The night before the rehearsal, I stand on the balcony of our penthouse, looking out at the city lights. Paul comes up behind me, wrapping his arms around me gently. "A penny for your thoughts," he murmurs. I lean back against him and sigh. I just hope tomorrow goes smoothly. I can't shake this feeling that something is going to go wrong. He kisses the top of my head, whispering, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I promise." At that moment, I feel reassured, but little do we know, that promise will be tested much sooner than we expect. The day of the rehearsal finally arrives. I wake up with a mix of excitement and a hint of dread, hoping everything goes well. As I walk into the venue, I can feel a thick tension in the air. My mother comes up to me, giving me a warm hug and saying, "Lauren, darling, you look beautiful." I smile and thank her, trying to shake off my nerves. "Is everyone here?" I ask, glancing around. She hesitates for a moment before nodding. "Yes, including Brian and your Uncle Timothy. They are well, you'll see." Taking a deep breath, I make my way through the crowd, preparing myself to face whatever challenges the day brings. No matter what happens, I remind myself I have Paul by my side, and together, we can handle anything. I saw Brian sitting in the corner, holding a drink and glaring at Paul. Nearby, Uncle Timothy was angrily whispering to Aunt Julie, his face red with frustration. Suddenly, the wedding planner called out, "All right, everyone, let's get this rehearsal started." We all moved into our places, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. It felt like something terrible was about to happen. As we were halfway through the rehearsal, Uncle Timothy suddenly stood up, looking unsteady. "I can't take this farce anymore," he shouted, pointing his finger directly at me. "You think you can just walk down that aisle like you're some kind of saint?" The entire room went silent, and I felt Paul tense up beside me. Trying to keep my voice calm, I asked, "Uncle Timothy, what are you talking about?" He stumbled toward me, his eyes wild with anger. "Don't pretend you're innocent. I know what you did. You've been blackmailing Julie, and the way you've treated my son, Brian, it's disgusting." I was speechless. Blackmail? Insulting Brian? None of this made any sense. "Uncle Timothy, you're not making any sense," I managed to say, feeling the shock settle in. "Oh, aren't I?" he sneered, looking at me with a furious expression. "You've always thought you were better than us, haven't you? Well, I won't stand for it anymore." Before I could react, Uncle Timothy lunged forward and gave me a hard shove. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. Paul quickly stepped in front of me, shouting, "Don't you dare touch her." A chaos erupted in the room. My father rushed over to hold back Uncle Timothy, while Brian started shouting random, slurred words, clearly not in control of himself. Aunt Julie burst into tears, and guests began murmuring and exchanging shocked glances. "Enough," my mother's voice cut through the noise. She stepped forward and said firmly, "Timothy, you need to leave now." Security quickly moved in, escorting Uncle Timothy out of the room, with Aunt Julie and a sulking Brian trailing behind him. I stood there, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. Paul wrapped his arm around me protectively. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, though I still felt in shock. I don't understand. Where did all this come from?" My father came over, looking serious and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I had no idea Timothy would act this way." After a pause, Paul asked quietly, "Should we call off the wedding?" I looked around the room, taking in the scene of our disrupted rehearsal and the concerned faces of our friends and family. I felt the weight of everything that had happened, but then I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "This was our day, our future. I wasn't going to let anyone ruin that for us." I glanced at Paul and squeezed his hand. "We're going to get through this together." I stood firm, saying, "We're not letting them ruin this. Our wedding is going to happen, and it's going to be perfect." Paul held my hand tightly. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded, feeling a new strength fill me. "Absolutely. Uncle Timothy, Brian, they don't get to control our happiness. We've worked too hard for this day." As we calmed the guests and tried to finish the rehearsal, I couldn't help but wonder why Uncle Timothy had acted the way he did. The accusations of blackmail, the insults, where had all of that come from? What was behind his anger? Later that night, as Paul and I sat in our living room trying to understand everything that had happened, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Brian. "This isn't over. You'll regret choosing him over me." I showed it to Paul, my hands shaking a little. "Should we be worried?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I took a deep breath, deleted the message, and set my phone aside. "No, we're not going to let them get to us. Whatever game they're trying to play, we're not joining in." But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Uncle Timothy's outburst, Brian's threat, it felt like something bigger was coming. Still, I told myself I'm Lauren, CEO of Stellar Motors and soon-to-be wife of Paul. I've dealt with tough situations before. I can handle a little family drama, or at least I thought I could. The day I dreamed of finally arrived. The venue looked like a scene from a fairy tale, flowers everywhere, candles glowing, and our friends and family gathered to celebrate. As I walked down the aisle toward Paul, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. When I reached him, he whispered, "You look stunning," and I couldn't help but smile, feeling all my worries melt away. The ceremony started, and for a beautiful, peaceful moment, everything was perfect. But just as we were about to say our vows, the door swung open with a loud bang. "Stop the wedding," Brian shouted as he stumbled into the room, clearly drunk. My heart sank. I'd hoped Brian wouldn't go this far. "Brian, please don't do this," I pleaded, trying to keep calm. But he didn't listen. He staggered forward, slurring his words, saying things about how we belonged together and how he wouldn't let me marry Paul. Guests looked around in shock, some whispering, others looking concerned. Paul stood beside me, trying to stay calm, but I could feel his frustration. My parents rushed to escort Brian out, but he fought back, causing more of a scene. As they finally managed to lead Brian out of the hall, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I looked up at Paul, who gave me a reassuring nod. The chaos had rattled me, but I wasn't going to let it ruin our day. The priest asked if we wanted to continue, and with a smile, I said, "Yes, please." The ceremony went on, and soon, we exchanged our vows and rings. Despite all the drama, I knew this was what I wanted more than anything. As we shared our first kiss as husband and wife, I felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over me. Brian's actions had shaken me, but they hadn't broken me. I was now married to the man I loved, and no amount of family drama could take that away. "I love you," Brian slurred, stumbling as he held out his hand. "You can't marry him. Choose me." But Brian wasn't done. To everyone's horror, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. Screams erupted as guests rushed for cover, panicking at the sight. Paul quickly pushed me behind him, shielding me. "Brian, put the gun down," Paul said, trying to stay calm, but Brian was beyond reason. "If I can't have her, no one can," he muttered, his face twisted with anger. Then suddenly the gun went off. Paul cried out, clutching his arm as blood soaked through his shirt. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. Security leapt forward, tackling Brian to the ground as more people screamed, and chaos took over the room. Paramedics rushed to Paul's side, and I stood there, frozen, watching as they bandaged his arm and tried to calm him down. As Brian was let out in handcuffs, my mind was spinning. My beautiful wedding day had turned into a nightmare. Uncle Timothy and Aunt Julie approached, their faces pale, looking shaken. "Lauren, please," Aunt Julie begged, her voice trembling. "Don't press charges. Brian needs help, not prison." I looked at her in disbelief, anger boiling inside me. "He shot my husband on our wedding day," I said firmly. "This ends now." Later, at the hospital, I sat by Paul's side as he rested. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm okay," he whispered, trying to reassure me. "What matters is that we're together." I nodded, feeling a new strength and resolve grow inside me. "Yes, we're together, and we'll get through this, every part of it." We sat there quietly, the pieces of our perfect day scattered around us. But even in the midst of the pain and shock, I knew one thing for sure. Our love was stronger than any bullet. No matter what, we would face whatever came next together. And so, Lauren and Paul's journey leaves us with a question. If you were in Lauren's position, would you press charges against Brian, or would you show mercy for the sake of family peace? What's more important, seeking justice for a dangerous act or trying to keep family relationships intact? Let's talk about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could open up an important discussion on family loyalty, personal boundaries, and the consequences of our actions.